She was supposed to make it home. June 14th, a warm summer night. Betty Langley, fresh out of high school, walked out of her boyfriend's house for the last time. A house she had been in 100 times before, a street she knew by heart. But this time, she wouldn't make it to her doorstep. Witnesses remember seeing her walk toward her car. A neighbor's security camera catches a glimpse of her stepping into the driver's seat. The taillights glow red, cutting through the darkness. She pulls away. She should have been home in 12 minutes, but 12 minutes pass. Then 20. An hour. Her phone stops ringing. Her parents stay awake, watching the driveway, waiting for headlights that never appear. The clock on the kitchen wall ticks forward, minute by minute, stretching into dawn. Betty Langley is gone. The next morning, her mother dials her number again. This time it goes straight to voicemail. Panic doesn't set in immediately. Maybe she stayed the night with a friend. Maybe she lost track of time. But when Betty's father drives her usual route, searching the side streets, the unease tightens. By noon, they call the police. A missing persons case. A teenage girl who had everything ahead of her. She was last seen leaving her boyfriend's house. But after that, she vanished. No signs of a struggle, no crash, no calls for help. A disappearance with no witnesses. Just a girl, alone in the night, swallowed by something no one saw coming. When a teenager doesn't come home, parents run through a checklist of reasons. Maybe she fell asleep at a friend's house. Maybe she forgot to call. Maybe her phone died. But as the hours stretched into the next morning, those maybes began to collapse under something heavier. By noon, Betty Langley was officially reported missing. A dispatcher's voice. Copy that. 19-year-old female. Last seen at 10:42 p.m. The search began immediately. Officers traced her last known movements, starting with the driveway she never reached. Her parents called every friend, every acquaintance, anyone who might have seen her. No one had. Her boyfriend, Mark Evans, told police the same thing. She left after a small argument. He watched her walk to her car, start the engine, and drive off. She didn't seem upset. She wasn't acting strange. She was just leaving. The route home was simple. A straight drive through town, past the gas station, the church, and a few scattered homes. Just 12 minutes. But somewhere between Mark's house and her own, Betty disappeared. By the afternoon, the town of Ashford was on edge. A missing girl wasn't just news. It was a rupture in the illusion of safety. People checked their security cameras. They searched the wooded areas off the main road. A local gas station clerk rewound footage from the night before. Nothing. Her car never stopped for gas. She never pulled into her driveway. She never called for help. A town-wide search was launched. Officers combed the roadsides, peering into ditches, scanning for broken glass, tire tracks, anything. Volunteers formed search parties, trudging through fields and abandoned properties, calling her name into the trees, but the silence gave nothing back. Cut to an empty swing set, the sound of wind chimes in the distance. By nightfall, Betty Langley had been missing for nearly 24 hours. Her mother sat by the phone, answering every call with a voice strained from worry. Her father paced the house, running through every possibility. Where do you even start when someone vanishes without a trace? The police interviewed Mark again, pressing for details. Did she say anything before she left? Did she mention stopping somewhere? Could she have gone to a friend's house? Mark's answers didn't change. She was headed home. That's all he knew. But then came the first disturbing clue. A woman jogging near a wooded shortcut off the main road reported something odd to police. Around midnight, she heard a sound. Quick, sharp, like a struggle. She thought it was an animal, maybe a deer caught in the brush. She didn't think much of it, until she saw the news. The search narrowed. Police shifted their focus. Somewhere in the trees, beyond the reach of headlights, something waited to be found. And the town of Ashford wasn't ready for what they would uncover next. For 2 days, the town of Ashford searched for Betty Langley. Her face was on every street corner, every local news broadcast. Volunteers scoured the roadsides, the empty fields, the parking lots. The police retraced her last known steps. But it wasn't a detective or a search team who found the first real clue. It was a man walking his dog. Early morning, 2 miles off the main road, a German shepherd tugged at its leash, pulling its owner toward a thicket of trees. At first, the man thought nothing of it. The woods were full of wildlife, rabbits, deer, the occasional stray cat. But his dog wouldn't stop. It whined, paced, ears pinned back. Then he smelled it, something foul, something that didn't belong. The man hesitated before stepping forward. The grass was flattened in places, like something or someone had been dragged. He followed the trail, his breath shallow, his hands shaking. And then he saw it, a shoe, a single white sneaker, half buried in the dirt. Not far from it, another. And just beyond that, something worse. The sound of an officer's voice crackling over the radio. "We have a body." The call went out at 7:48 a.m. Within minutes, the woods were crawling with law enforcement. Officers marked off the area with yellow tape, pushing back the few early morning onlookers. The body was found in a small clearing, partially hidden beneath a fallen tree branch. Betty Langley, 19 years old, still wearing the same clothes from the night she disappeared. Her body showed signs of a struggle, cuts along her arms, bruises along her wrists, a deep wound on the side of her head. Her phone was missing. So were her car keys. But her car, nowhere in sight. Investigators returned to Mark Evans, the last person to see her alive, the boyfriend who had watched her walk to her car and drive off. The same car that was now missing. His reaction was immediate: shock, disbelief, horror. "She was just going home," he kept saying. "She was just going home." But home was 12 minutes away, and Betty had ended up in the woods. The crime scene told a partial story. Betty had fought back. Someone had overpowered her. The wound on her head suggested blunt force trauma, but there were no signs of assault, no obvious motive, and no answers. Just a girl, stolen from the night, left in a place she was never meant to be. The case was no longer about a missing girl. It was about a murder. A small town can hold its breath for only so long. For 2 days, Ashford had been waiting, hoping. But when Betty Langley's body was found in the woods, that hope collapsed. Now it was no longer a search, it was a hunt. The first priority, reconstructing her last moments. She left her boyfriend's house at 10:42 p.m. She never made it home. Her body was discovered 2 miles from her usual route, in a dense wooded area, partially covered. A sign of panic, a rushed attempt to hide something. But the biggest question remained unanswered. How did she get there? Her car was missing. Her phone was gone. No one had reported hearing a crash. No one had seen her stopped on the side of the road. She had simply vanished from one place and appeared in another. Mark was the last known person to see her alive. That fact alone made him their starting point. The questions came fast. Did she seem upset? Did she say she was meeting anyone? Was there trouble in their relationship? His answers didn't change. No, they hadn't been fighting. No, she wasn't acting strangely. No, she didn't mention stopping anywhere. She was just going home. But something about his demeanor kept detectives pressing. His hands shook when he spoke. His voice cracked on certain words. Grief? Shock? Or something else? They didn't know what to believe. Betty and Mark had been together for over a year. He had always been polite, respectful. He had eaten dinner at their house, spent holidays with them. But now he was at the center of an investigation. The detectives weren't ready to call him a suspect, but they weren't ready to rule him out either. Then came the first break, a traffic camera. At 10:47 p.m., 5 minutes after Betty left Mark's house, her car was seen at an intersection. She was alone in the driver's seat. 10 minutes later, another camera picked up her car again, this time turning down an unlit side road. That road led nowhere, just empty fields, just woods. The timestamp was chilling, 10:57 p.m. That was the last time Betty Langley was seen alive, but she wasn't supposed to be there. Someone had led her off course. Who was waiting for her, and why did she never turn back? Secrets don't stay buried forever, especially in a town like Ashford. For days, the police had been piecing together the timeline of Betty Langley's last night. The traffic camera footage had confirmed that, for reasons unknown, she had turned onto a deserted side road at 10:57 p.m. But what happened after that? What had pulled her off her usual route? The investigation took a new turn when detectives started looking beyond Betty's closest circle. Everyone had been so focused on Mark Evans, her boyfriend, the last person to see her, that no one had stopped to ask, who else might have wanted Betty dead? The answer, it turned out, was complicated. Betty Langley had always been well-liked, a model student, a girl with big plans, but she also had a past, and some people weren't ready to let go of it, her ex-boyfriend. Before Mark, there was Dylan Reese, a name that hadn't come up much in the investigation, identical to Betty's. Same make, same model, same color. Could someone have mistaken his car for hers? Or worse, had Dylan used that to his advantage? Betty had turned onto that road for a reason, and the deeper investigators looked, the more it seemed like someone had been waiting for her, someone she knew, someone she trusted, and someone who wasn't telling the whole truth. The boyfriend's alibi. Where was Mark Evans at the time of Betty Langley's murder? The last time he saw her, she was leaving his driveway. That was his story, and he stuck to it. He had no reason to harm her, no motive. But in a murder investigation, an alibi isn't just a defense. It's a test, and Mark was about to be tested. Mark claimed that after Betty left, he went inside, played video games for about an hour, then went to bed. It was simple, maybe too simple. There were no text messages between them after she left, no missed calls, no signs of a fight escalating later in the night. If Mark was responsible for Betty's death, he wasn't acting like it. Nothing. No evidence of a struggle, no blood, no signs of forced entry. His parents confirmed he was home that night. His younger brother remembered seeing him in the living room, controller in hand, eyes locked on the screen. But detectives weren't done yet. Mark's house was in a residential neighborhood, quiet streets, small houses, a place where everyone knew each other. A neighbor's security camera captured footage of Betty's car leaving his driveway at 10:42 p.m. Then at 11:15 p.m., the camera caught something else. Mark, stepping outside, looking down the street, then going back inside. A small detail, but a strange one. Why go outside? Why look down the street? Detectives asked him about it. He hesitated. Then finally he answered. He had a bad feeling. She was taking too long to text me that she got home, Sean, he said, so I stepped out to see if maybe she came back. Came back? Betty had no reason to turn around. But Mark insisted. He thought maybe she had forgotten something. Maybe she had second thoughts about leaving after their argument. She never did. So he went back inside and never checked again. Mark's alibi held up. His parents confirmed he never left the house. His brother saw him before and after Betty left. And then there was the traffic camera. Betty's car was seen miles away, heading toward the deserted road where she vanished. Mark wasn't with her, which meant someone else was. Mark wasn't their guy, but that only meant one thing. The real killer was still out there, and they were getting closer. A town in fear had settled over Ashford like a heavy fog. A girl was dead. A killer was out there, and nobody knew who it was. For years, the town had been a place where people left doors unlocked, where teenagers stayed out late without worry. But now the streets were quiet by nightfall. Parents called their kids home early. Stores closed before sunset. Trust had shattered. Because if Betty Langley, kind, bright, full of life, could be taken, then who was safe? Her friends were shaken. Many had seen her that final week, smiling, making plans for college, talking about her future. Now those same people were left wondering, had they missed something? Had Betty known she was in danger? Or worse, had she known her killer? The investigation had shifted. With Mark Evans cleared, police focused on new leads. They combed through Betty's phone records, her social media, her emails. That's when they found it. A message, sent the day before she died. It was from an unknown number. The message was brief. "We need to talk. Meet me tomorrow night." No name, no explanation, just a request. Had Betty agreed? Was that why she turned down that deserted road? The number wasn't registered to a name. It was a burner phone, a dead end. But it meant one thing. Whoever sent that message didn't want to be found. Rumors spread fast in small towns. People had their theories. Some believed Betty had a secret relationship. Others whispered about old grudges, jealous rivals, someone who wanted her success to crumble. And then there were those who thought, closed doors. The loss was too fresh, the wound too deep. They wanted answers, but so far the police had none. Then another break, a witness, a man who had been driving down the highway that night. He didn't see Betty, but he saw her car, parked on the side of the road, and beside it, another vehicle, one that didn't belong. Somewhere in the town of Ashford, a killer was walking free, but not for long. The break in the case. Some cases stall, some take months, even years before a single thread unravels. But then there are the ones that break wide open in a matter of seconds. This was one of those cases, and the moment came with a phone call. The witness had seen something, or rather someone. On the night of Betty Langley's murder, as he drove down that lonely stretch of road, he spotted two vehicles. One was Betty's, a car everyone in town recognized. The other was unfamiliar, a dark-colored pickup, older model, tinted windows, parked just behind hers, and standing outside of it, facing Betty's car. A man. The witness hadn't seen much. It was late, the road dimly lit by his headlights as he passed. But he caught a few details. The man was tall, broad shoulders, wearing a hood. And he wasn't just standing there. He was leaning into Betty's driver's side window, talking to her, or arguing. Had Betty known him? Had she pulled over voluntarily? Or had she been forced to stop? Detectives needed answers. It was a long shot. An old pickup wasn't exactly a rare sight in Ashford. Half the town drove one, but one detail made it stand out. A dent. The witness had noticed a dent on the passenger side. Not large, but enough to be memorable. And just like that, the search narrowed. A truck like that had been in for repairs just weeks ago. The owner? A man named Shane Calloway. Shane wasn't a stranger to the police. Bar fights, disorderly conduct, a history of losing his temper. And one more thing. He knew Betty. They had gone to the same high school. He was 2 years older. They had crossed paths before. But why would Betty have been with him that night? They had their lead, and this time, they weren't letting it slip away. The break in the case had arrived. Now they just had to prove it. Now it's about confronting the truth Shane Calloway had spent years slipping through the cracks. A man with a temper, quick fists, and a reputation no one wanted to challenge. His name had come up in plenty of police reports, but nothing had ever stuck. That was about to change. The door opened just enough to reveal him. Shane Calloway. Tall, broad-shouldered, a deep crease between his brows. He leaned against the doorframe, eyes shifting from the detective's badge to the officers behind him. "What's this about?" he asked, voice tight. They told him. Betty Langley, the night she was murdered, his truck, his face, the sketch. Shane didn't flinch, didn't react, just gave a slow nod and said, "Yeah, I knew Betty." But that wasn't the question. The question was, where had he been that night? He didn't deny knowing Betty. He even admitted to seeing her the night she disappeared. But he had his own version of the story. According to Shane, Betty had pulled over first. She waved him down, said she needed to talk. She was upset, he claimed. Something was wrong. But when detectives pressed him for details, his answers were vague. She was worried about something she wouldn't say out loud. She just wanted to vent, Shane added with a shrug. Then she left. That was it. But it wasn't, because Betty never made it home. Phone records. Betty's last incoming message. "We need to talk. Meet me tomorrow night." Shane's face remained unreadable, but his silence spoke volumes. And then, the final piece. Security footage. A gas station camera, just a few miles from where Betty was found. Timestamp, 11:23 p.m. Shane Calloway, his truck, pulling onto the highway from a side road. The same side road Betty's car had been found near. "This is your chance, Shane." Another pause, longer this time. Then, a smirk, a slow, knowing shake of the head. "I think I want a lawyer," Shane said. Shane Calloway wasn't talking, but the truth was closing in. The final part. Justice or mystery. The trial of Shane Calloway wasn't just about Betty Langley. It was about a town demanding answers, a family searching for closure, and a killer who might finally be unmasked. But in murder cases, truth and justice aren't always the same thing. The evidence was strong. Shane had been at the scene. His truck had been caught on surveillance. He was the last known person to see Betty alive. And yet, there was no murder weapon, no DNA, no eyewitness who saw the crime itself. He never confessed, never broke. He sat through the trial with the same cool demeanor he had in the interrogation room. If he was guilty, he wasn't showing it. If he was innocent, he wasn't trying to prove it. They listened as the prosecution painted Shane as a man with a temper, a man who had been rejected before, a man who had reason to lash out. But the defense had their argument too. They reminded the jury there were no fingerprints, no blood in Shane's truck, no physical evidence linking him directly to Betty's death. They knew Shane was lying. They just couldn't prove it. The deliberation took hours, then a day, then two, until finally, a verdict. Not guilty, Shane Calloway walked. He stepped out of that courthouse a free man. And just like that, Betty Langley's murder remained unsolved. Did Shane get away with it? Or was the real killer still out there? The official investigation had ended, but for some, it would never be over. Some questions find answers, some never do. And some haunt a town forever.